You're listening to the Unlocking Africa podcast.
I myself am very, very passionate about supporting women and young people, and I spend quite a lot of time looking at that, especially within my field at the moment. For me, the ambition, the vision was actually I want to understand what is happening in this field. It really exists to close the digital and finance divide. That is really ultimately our ambition. For us, we decided actually it's important that we start to look at CBDC in the context of Africa. And we were honestly very, very overwhelmed, and we had such a massive response. We need clear policies, and the CFTA is one of those policy shifts.
Stay tuned as we bring you inspiring people who are unlocking Africa's economic potential. You're listening to the Unlocking Africa podcast with your host, Tessa Adamu.
Welcome to the Unlocking Africa podcast, where we find amazing people who are doing amazing things to unlock Africa's economic potential. Today, we have a special guest. We have Michello Chivunga, who is CEO and founder of Global Policy House. Welcome to the podcast, Michello. How are you?
I'm great, Tessa. Thank you so much for having me. It's fantastic to be here.
Oh, it's great to have you on the podcast. I know we've been speaking about this for a little while.
Indeed.
I'm happy the date has finally arrived.
Indeed, absolutely. I know we've gone over and over. It's so exciting, I think, especially now to be covering this. So I'm very, very excited. Thanks so much for the invitation.
It's an honor to be hosting you on the podcast. So I've purposely kept my intro short so that you can tell us a bit more about yourself. So please feel free to introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about who Michello Chivunga is.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I think most people would probably joke and say Michello is the blockchain girl, right? So
oh, brilliant.
Most people are quite familiar with that side of things. But just to introduce myself, so hi, everyone. My name is Michello Chivunga. And as Tessa said, I'm the CEO and founder of Global Policy House. I originally started my career in government policy a couple of years ago, and then shifted from policy into banking and finance, and eventually ended up in the technology field. I've been very much spending quite a lot of my time really looking and evaluating the blockchain and the digital economy and what's happening within blockchain and digital economy. Originally, I'm a Zambian girl, a very, very traditional Zambian girl coming from a Zambian village called Pemba in
Fantastic.
Zambia. And then, of course, very exciting. So, from Pemba, and I've spent quite a lot of time in the UK as well. So I'm African-British at the moment, but very much my roots actually stem from Zambia. And I'm very, very proud of that. And I've spent quite a lot of time, I suppose, really promoting what is happening in Africa as a whole, in general, and sharing that with the world. So my work really involves quite a lot of engagement globally. But at the same time, I think our focus at my company has really been very much around looking at African emerging markets. I myself am very, very passionate about, supporting women and young people, and I spend quite a lot of time looking at that, especially within my field at the moment. I am also advising several governments around the world looking at digital economy, looking at regulation and policy around digital and blockchain. That's pretty much my background, if you like.
Amazing. So you gave us kind of a nice overview about who you are. So I was wondering, can you tell us a bit more specifically about your journey into the world of, say, investment, tech, digital economy and blockchain? Can you tell us a bit more about that journey?
Sure. So my journey really, I've covered different sectors in my career, I would say, to begin with. And those sectors have been very, very different. So, I started, like I said, looking at government policy, and then I shifted into banking and finance. And my journey really, I studied at the University of Surrey here in the UK. Prior to that, I was actually studying. My secondary school education was actually in Nigeria.
Oh, wow.
For example, at Atlantic Hall. Many Nigerians will know Atlantic Hall.
Yes.
And Nigeria is very much also home for me, even though I'm not necessarily Nigerian, but I spent a lot of time in Nigeria. So, post-Nigeria, I came to the UK to study at the University of Surrey, where I did business. And then after that, I started my career in government and housing policy and spent quite some time there. And then I shifted into banking and finance after like 7 years in policy. So I've spent quite a lot of time really on the government and policy side to begin with in my career. And then I shifted, of course, into banking and finance. And that's what really gave me the interest around money, and evaluating money and also looking at investments, especially.
Fantastic.
Investments, especially around, supporting businesses with access to finance is something I was very passionate about. Even when I was in my banking career, it was always very much looking at how can we support more young people, how can we support more women around finance. So that really kind of triggered my interest in diverse investments, if you like, and sustainable investment. And I've always been quite interested. So spent quite a bit of time in banking and finance. And then, of course, while I was in banking and finance, I also came across the Satoshi paper, the blockchain paper,
Yes.
the first paper that was written. And I read that with a lot of interest as a young, excited person who was involved in the finance sector at the time, and got excited by it and thought, actually, there's something in this. I don't really know what exactly it is, but I'm going to spend some time looking at this and digging into this. So I spent a lot of my spare time, reading up about blockchain, reading up about, cryptocurrency and what does this all mean. And while I was in banking, I think for me, the exciting thing was always working across borders. So, while I was in banking, I was quite responsible, for example, managing relationships between the European Union and what was happening in the UK around financing, looking at financing policy, looking at banking policy, looking at banking regulation. And of course, at the time, there was also the financial, we just kind of stemmed out of the financial crisis. So for me, it was always about, okay, how can we rebuild trust? How can we ensure that the banking industry can have better representation? And we spent quite a lot of time in rebuilding that trust with working with counterparts from around the world. And that really kind of gave me the interest and the knowledge. And I really learned a lot while I was at the British Bankers Association, which is now known as UK Finance, and learned quite a lot because for me, that was the first time I was really exposed to the financial industry. So for me, I really appreciated that opportunity to have learned, but it also gave me ideas about what I wanted to do next. And for me, what I really wanted to do next was start to explore the technology side and looking at the blockchain and cryptocurrency stuff I had started to read about. And so I decided to kind of shift again and move into the technology field and decided to actually start doing some research. And one of the things I did, I realized that, okay, look, I don't have that much insight and knowledge around cryptocurrency necessarily. So I decided to actually start to look for opportunities that I could shift so I can learn about cryptocurrency. And I came across a position, a part-time position, much lower paid, much lower grade than what I was doing in banking. And I said, you know what, I'm just going to apply for this because it was advertised as a cryptocurrency project officer, and at the time there was no one kind of advertising anything to do with crypto at all, right? So I was very fascinated by the sheer fact that this was out there. And I applied and I did manage eventually to get the role with the professors at the University of Surrey and ended up quitting my job and heading to go and do this part-time job, very, much lower pay than what I was getting, of course, in the city in London. And for me, the ambition, the vision was actually, I want to understand what is happening in this field. I want to understand what the future holds around cryptocurrency and blockchain. So that's how I started my journey in terms of looking into blockchain. And at the time as well, I started playing around with investing into Bitcoin, right? And looking at getting my own Bitcoin, if you like. And I don't regret that decision. So,
Are you a Bitcoin millionaire now?
Oh, I wish. I shall not reveal that, but I shall not reveal because we wait and see. I'm one of those people kind of waiting to see what happens. Let's put it that way. But no, I was very, very grateful to have the opportunity to have learned with the professors, actually do some actual research and development around this. And at Surrey, it was one of the first universities actually reviewing cryptocurrencies.
Oh, wow.
And we did, and we did quite a few projects with government and other people, right, while I was at Surrey. I've always had the urge to run my own business. Even when I was in banking, I was like, oh, I really want to do my own business, but I just never had that confidence to go off and do it. So the other, I feel like I was late to actually start my own business. I should have started way back. But eventually, once I did the research and development stuff I did at Sari, I then decided actually now is the time I really want to set up my own thing, because I had so many networks, I had so many connections. I understood what was happening in the sector. I really got the ideas behind what blockchain, the underlying technology, was about. I started to look and understand what is this issue around cryptography, around encryption, and I really had a good, solid understanding. And I partly owe that. I partly owe that to the professors, that I worked with at Surrey. And so I decided to go and set up Global Policy House, and that's how Global Policy House came about, if you like. So Global Policy House is a bit of a mashup between, all the roles I've held in my career, right? So I've mashed it up, if you like. It's a very special organization because it's not one where you say, okay, no, we only just focused on tech necessarily. No, we focus on other things. So that's the journey, really.
Fantastic. So, you've beautifully detailed your journey into investment in tech and how you developed your passion and purpose for what you are doing, which has obviously led you to founding and being the CEO of Global Policy House. So I was wondering if you can tell us a little bit more about the type of work that you're involved in with Global Policy House.
Absolutely. No, thank you so much. So Global Policy is like, I like to think of it as a very special child of mine, right? It's like,
beautiful. It's your baby.
It's my baby, right? And I really am very proud of the progress that the baby has made, if you like, because literally in under, almost under 3 years or so, I think we have really achieved so much. And for me, so, what is Global Policy House? Really, to sum it, Global Policy House really exists to close the digital and finance divide. That is really ultimately our ambition and our goal, is that we want to make sure that every single person out there in the world, regardless of where you are in the world, regardless of your your sort of status, we want you to be able to take advantage of what the digital world offers, and also to take advantage of innovative financing models, right, that can help you to progress your business. If you're a startup or you're an entrepreneur, or you're a woman-led business, or, you're in Asia, or you're in Africa, you're in London, you're in Paris, you're in New York, wherever. We don't really care. We want to be able to provide that equality, if you like, to make sure that nobody's being left behind in the digital world. And we want to ensure that the financing world is also starting to innovate, and start to provide access to finance to millions and millions of people who do not have that access. So number one is we exist to close the digital and finance divide, ensuring that we don't leave people behind. We don't leave anyone behind. And again, the main goal, what is our main goal? So we have kind of 3 pillars that we look at Global Policy House. The first, like you talked about a bit earlier on, around investments. So what do we mean by investments? We support obviously different projects and to be able to access finance. And it's not just a case of, okay, we try and, provide you with access to finance, and then we say, okay, off we go, goodbye. No, we want to be able to look at investment readiness programs. We want to be able to do some mentoring. We want to be able to also match and compare VCs or other investment types to match them with businesses and startups and companies that have some of the most innovative products and services coming to market. Ourselves, we are a company that is innovating constantly and looking to build new products, and ourselves are growing and looking to access finance. So we know exactly, the ups and downs that businesses go through, especially businesses of our type. Pillar number 2 is very much around the digital economy, or the stuff we hear about blockchain, about cryptocurrency, and under this pillar is where we're doing several things. Number 1, we are very, very passionate about educating on what is cryptocurrency, right? What is blockchain? Yes. Because I still have millions of people, still messaging me after I don't know how many years, saying to me, Michelle, oh, you're the Bitcoin girl. I'm like, no, I'm not really the Bitcoin girl. But I can help you, to kind of navigate to navigate the space, right? So we really want to educate so that people start to understand, actually, if I want to get involved with digital assets, what does that mean? If I want to go and start getting access to Bitcoin or Ethereum or ADA or whatever, right? Whatever coin that's out there, what does that actually mean?
Yes.
How do I go about, making sure that I am safe as I do this activity, right? I am not, going to end up losing my money. I understand what the difference is between a wallet and, all these things. I think there's still a lack of high-level education. So we're doing a lot around the education. And education, I don't necessarily just mean with the everyday person. We're talking about education also with governments and regulators and, kind of central banks and high-level people as well, where we want to say, okay, this is what the industry has got to offer. Please let's work together to understand the industry so we can come up with the right appropriate regulations and things. So our education really is kind of broken down different segments of society. So you've got government, you've got enterprise, you've got young people and women, and we do a lot of that training. And then, of course, under, again, this pillar, digital economy, blockchain, we're also doing R&D, research and development. So for us, it's very important that we base anything that we do, we base with evidence. So we look at evidence-based research, where we're doing research to understand, okay, what do we mean by blockchain? What do we mean by cryptocurrency? Let's research it. Let's do some research papers. We've worked on a couple of research papers, some very specific around the African continent. So what does digital mean for Africa? This is what we are looking at under the pillar. And then, of course, we are also looking to build our own products and services, our own products, blockchain products as well, that we have under that pillar. And it's not necessarily just blockchain. We might be combining that with AI or other products that we are hoping to bring out to market in the next couple of years or so. And then the final pillar is very, very exciting. And the final pillar is policy, of course. So for us, we feel like, you cannot look at these things just necessarily in isolation. And I think even within the new world of digital economy and blockchain, we have to start to think about, okay, how do we bring in the policy framework or that enabling environment for us to be able to operate? So we really believe strongly that we need to interact as a fintech / an investment company, if you want to think of us that way. We feel we have to influence what happens at policy level, at government level, to make sure that we have an environment where we can actually do what we need to do as a company. So we work very, very closely with large institutions, including the UN, the African Union, the Commonwealth, where we are influencing policy. And we are going to governments and saying, okay, we think that policy framework should be like this, should be like that, so that we can ensure that we can operate properly. And so some of the policy work we are doing is really centered around that, creating an enabling environment. So yes, so the last pillar of kind of global policy house is what we refer to as policy. And under policy, really our main core aim is to work very closely with governments and policymakers to ensure that, that the policies that actually have formed, we have a role in shaping that policy, especially when it comes to like the digital economy. And looking at what is happening within the digital economy, be it looking at digital assets, central bank digital currencies, stable coins, what does this mean? How can you formulate regulation that actually fits the market? So we work very, very closely with stakeholders on how we can shape policy and ensure that that policy is actually fit for purpose. Especially that we are in this new world now where, the digital economy and digital assets are going to play a more massive role. Some countries are more ahead than others and are a little bit more, kind of welcoming to looking at how we shape regulation. We have spent a lot of time, I think, and effort really more looking at what is happening around the policy environment in Africa. So again, we're very involved with the African Continental Free Trade Area, for example, and the work that's progressing around that. And really our ambition, we're a fintech, of course, but also a cross between a fintech and an investment company. And any of these policies will impact how we develop as a company. So for us, we feel it's important to play a part in shaping the policies that come out and also advising and providing our insight into governments and policymakers and regulators on what these regulations would impact. So the ambition really is to be able to help shape the right policies. The ambition really is being able to create an environment where ourselves and our other counterparts, in the fintech ecosystem are able to deliver what they need to deliver without the restrictions of policy, right? Without the restrictions of poorly regulated markets, if you like, which we ourselves are not necessarily interested in, because, in order to do business and do businesses successfully, you need to be able to be an environment that is, a stable environment, right?
Yes.
And to be able to interact. So the policy pillar is actually very important. I mean, the other side of the policy pillar is we're also very passionate about ensuring that we are looking at capacity building, right? So supporting women and youth, for example, to help with capacity development, digital skills training, and that sort of stuff, mentoring. And we actually have a unit at Global Policy House, the International Capacity Building Network. And that network is really designed to support women and build skills, and also to mentor and support them through their own journeys of development.
Fantastic. So, I mean, you've touched upon a lot of areas there, and also touched upon how you're trying to spread the word and communicate the importance of the digital economy, cryptocurrency, blockchain. One thing which I saw recently was that Global Policy House was involved in organising the recently held, was it Africa CBDC Week?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
So I was wondering, can you please tell us about the event and its importance within the Africa digital currency space, and how it ties into the work that you're doing at Global Policy House?
Sure. So one of the areas, and this would very much fall under the digital economy blockchain pillar, if you like, actually probably cuts across the three pillars I talked about.
Fantastic.
And one of the things, the reason we're looking at CBDC, and for those that don't know what CBDC is, really stands for Central Bank Digital Currency.
Okay.
And the reason we have been looking at CBDCs is that, if you think about it, the world's central banks, I think over 85%, if not more now, actually are exploring central bank digital currencies. So looking to see if they can introduce a digital currency. Yeah, the central bank can introduce a digital currency, which will be backed by the central bank's reserves. That's the difference from, kind of normal sort of mobile money type thing. This is backed by the central bank, so it's slightly different. And what we're seeing is that, we saw that, over 85% of the world's central banks are looking at this. Yes, in Africa, there has been some little engagement around CBDC when we started looking at this, a couple of years ago, about 3 years ago. But we noticed that there was a little bit of a gap. And for us, we decided actually it's important that we start to look at CBDC in the context of Africa, yes. Especially that we are already looking at policy frameworks in Africa, like the Continental Free Trade Area. And of course, the monetary system really is very, very important for the African economy, because our currencies in Africa also need to evolve, if you think about it, right? We've been sometimes quite heavily dependent on external currency, which has also affected us as a continent. So for us as a company, we're very interested to start to explore, what do CBDCs actually mean in the context of Africa? And so we decided to run a couple of summits, and we decided the first place to do the summit was actually right in the height of COVID in 2020.
Okay.
And we decided, no, let's be brave and let's go and see what happens. Shall we explore CBDCs, right, in the context of Africa? And we hosted in Nigeria virtually. We had the first CBDC summit in Nigeria in 2020. And that was, we thought, okay, we might get a few people who might come back, because we were not seeing that much activity happening. And we were honestly very, very overwhelmed. And we had such a massive response, that we had, I think, up to about 300 people on the waiting list to join this event. So for us, that spoke volumes. The data itself spoke to say, actually, this is a very important topic. And we need to explore this a little bit more deeply. And that's when we decided, actually, we want to be able to look at this across the regions in Africa, right, to understand, because Africa is a big continent. There's 55 countries. So we cannot look at it and say, okay, because we've done X in Nigeria, it's the same everywhere. Not at all.
Of course.
So we've decided to kind of split it, kind of regional evaluation of CBDCs. And as a company, we've decided to actually, for the next 5 to 10 years, we will be looking strategically at understanding what is happening with CBDCs across the continent. What do they actually mean? Is it beneficial for Africa or not? Should we be looking at a single currency instead, or should we be looking at CBDCs? So we asked quite a lot of these questions during our summit, and we started to look at it, in terms of looking at hearing from the African perspective. And the aim of the summit was really, kind of looking to gather, of course, evidence from leaders within the digital economy space, but also within the CBDC space. Post doing the Nigeria summit, which was very, very popular, we decided actually we needed like a whole week to actually evaluate what is happening around CBDC. So we don't end up in the situation we had in Nigeria, where we had some people on the waiting list, right? And we really had just so many interested parties. So we spread this time, hosted the very first in the world, I believe, the first Africa CBDC week, where we spent the whole week really evaluating what does CBDC mean. And then we had, split it by international perspectives and best practice, what is happening internationally around CBDCs. Who is designing what, who is kind of leading in terms of looking at design and development around CBDC. And then we had specifically around Africa, where are we, when it comes to CBDC? Should we be looking at CBDC as a solution for Africa? And it was, again, very, very well received, I think, with over, lots of people, over people connected virtually, as well as we plan to have physical events that are coming up in June. And that those physical events between the 15th to the 20th of June, we will have some physical events on CBDC in Kenya. And we'll also have some in Rwanda. So I do encourage people to look out for those. Because again, why CBDC? Why are we looking at CBDC? Because I think, most nations around the world are now shifting and starting to look at central bank digital currency and even setting up their own central bank digital currencies.
Yes.
So in the context of cross-border, interactions and cross-border payments with all these countries, how are we going to be able to interact, right? If we have our own kind of individual CBDC, they've got their own CBDC. Where's the interoperability, right? How can we make sure that we're not, again, being left behind to go into fit into systems that are developed that we don't necessarily, cannot take part? The other reasoning is also, of course, the African Continental Free Trade Area now is in motion. And we want to be able to say, okay, in the context of this policy shift, what do the CBDC or the monetary system for Africa look like? What about payments innovation, right? One of the hurdles in Africa has also been around payments, being able to have, good payments infrastructure and payment systems, which we're starting to see change now with a whole range of new innovations coming into play, markets coming into play. So that's really the kind of the reasoning behind it. And we very much are at the forefront, if you like,
Yes.
of leading these discussions around digital currency.
Brilliant. So, I mean, you've gone into great detail there regarding the CBDC week and talking about the details of different types of central bank digital currency, also influencing policy across regions in Africa from a African perspective, which is hugely important. So I was wondering if you can touch upon what are some of the positive or negative impacts that policy is having on the African digital currency?
Yeah, I think one of the, if you like, negatives is I think we need to be able to have very clear rules and governance around what is happening, just generally, number one, in the digital economy. So have we got clear rules around data, for example? Data sharing is quite important in order for this economy to work very well. Have we got harmonized rules, right? Have we got clear dispute resolution systems in place? Can we think about ensuring that, there's that interoperability across systems so that this works? So some of the policy impacts is very much around, if we don't have that enabling environment, we're not very clear around some of the rules or do not have any rules, because there are some countries in Africa where we don't have very clear data rules, for example, right? And it makes it very difficult to navigate, especially if you're an innovator and you're trying to say, okay, I want to develop X and I'll put this development I have in different countries. They're very, very different rules, when you move from one country to the next. So you have to be very conscious around, okay, what can I do? What can I do? Sometimes that's a bit of a barrier, and it limits innovation and limits opportunity to be creative. When you think about central bank digital currency, that's slightly separate thing, because obviously that is very much innovation being geared and driven by the central bank. But when you're thinking about innovation as a whole, right, we've got many innovative companies that are coming up. And sometimes, when I've spoken to some of these companies, what they're saying to me is actually, no, Michelle, I'm an e-commerce business. I cannot, I'm not clear about e-commerce rules around ABCD when I'm doing my business from country X to country B. And that is very challenging for them. Oh, I want to export into different markets, but the costs are so expensive for me to export. Oh, I cannot get paid, because, the payment system isn't quite robust from one country to the next, and this is really the type of solutions that we want to look at. And we want to be able to go to policy as well to say, okay, the policy, the rules that you have around ABCD cannot work because it limits that e-commerce business from doing ABCD. Can we maybe tweak it like this, like that? Or there isn't any regulation around things like cryptocurrency. There isn't any regulation around things like digital assets. What are we going to do about that? Can a company come in and, open a crypto bank or not? What are the rules around ABCD, right? So it's very, very important, I think, that environment starts to look a little bit more deeper and create a policy environment that is conducive. Now, in terms of the positives, of course, now we have the continental free trade, which I think for me is a game changer, and I'm so impressed with the progress, the speed of progress that is being made with the CFTA. And that really is laying the foundation for the African continent to build its own. Let's put it that way, to build its own and create its own, be it around regulation, be it around rules, be it around trade. It really starting to create a whole new opportunity. And for me, I kind of match CFTA with the word opportunity and choice, right? Because it's creating opportunity and also providing options and choices for people, especially young people, especially women, to start to interact into these worlds that they might not have interacted in previously. And then the digital economy, if you like, is very much that kind of fuel, if you like. So the digital economy is going to be one part of fuel that is needed for the CFTA to actually come to life. So be it e-commerce or be it, us building blockchain products or building AI products, all that is very important. But in order for all that to actually have an impact on the continent, we need clear policies. And the CFTA is one of those policy shifts. I think that's going to be able to enable some of this stuff to happen. So it's very, very exciting.
So you've talked there about innovations, exporting across different markets and borders, and the different types of solutions that are coming about. So we've recently seen the introduction of Africa's new cross-border payment system, which I guess from looking from the outside, I'm assuming that must have been a policy nightmare to implement, but it's been successfully implemented. Do you think this indicates that African governments are embracing this type of technology in terms of future technology?
Yes, 100%. I think this is going to enable, number one, I'll answer 100% that yes, African governments are starting to very much embrace technology as a whole. Partly, because of course we had COVID, and I think the whole world had no choice but to kind of start to utilize digitalization as a whole. Even before COVID, there are many African governments that I know were very much quite ahead, actually, in terms of pushing for innovation in their countries. You take Kenya, you take Rwanda, you take, there are many, we can go over and over. And that's not really changed necessarily. Maybe it has been, the interest in the technology solutions has definitely increased across the nation. But it's also really excited, I think, governments to think differently, to think about actually we need to invest more in understanding what is happening in the digital economy, which for me is exciting. We need to be able to start to look at, okay, if this new payment system that you talked about, what are the opportunities with the payment system, right? So, for example, the one you're referring to by Afrexim Bank, the payments and settlement system is very, very exciting for the continent because, again, it's very much, I like to see it as a connector when it comes to things like payments and settlements across the continent, which is very, very helpful because currently sometimes you have, I think most of the African banks have to pretty much reroute, most of the kind of payments for settlement and all that has to go through foreign offshore,
yes,
relationship, which is costly. which again can be very complex because you have to worry about things like KYC and all this, which again can delay processes and systems. So for me, PAPS, which is the new payment system introduced by Bank, is a really good step forward, I think, in terms of trying to bring together and be the connector around payments. It's not necessarily a competitive a competitor, right, with other products, but it's more about uniting and bringing together, which I think is very useful. And then the other very interesting thing is, again, you start to look at harmonization, which is important. So you need to have harmonized, I refer to harmonized rules before. So, for example, you can still have things like harmonized KYC, for example, through this system. You can look at how you look at utilizing data that comes from this, right, to make more informed decisions. So for me, I think it provides an opportunity, right, that can lead to efficiency, just general efficiency, reducing costs, making sure that intra-regional trade can happen much, much better, right? Strengthening cross-border payments, intra-regional trade in Africa is the whole point. And do we have a payment system in place that works and functions? Then we can encourage and have more intra-regional trade across the continent, but also not just across the continent, because of course we also want to leverage opportunities to export more outside of the continent rather than import even our own raw materials, right? When they're finished in other countries, we are importing. No, we need to be able to export and produce our own, final goods and services that we can also export. And you have a strong payments infrastructure there, to enable us to do that. So I think that's really important.
Fantastic. So I guess you've landed on the strong payment structure, which will enable intra-regional trade and the ability for African countries to export their products. So would you say that digital payments or cryptocurrencies are the answer long-term to Africa's payment problems, and why?
Well, yes, I wouldn't say they're the answer, not necessarily. They're part of the answer.
Okay.
I think they should be part of the answer, especially if they're well understood. Again, I'm emphasizing on the importance of really understanding what these digital assets can do and what they can do. And, they're definitely not there to save the world, right? We're all very clear about that. Well, I hope people begin to realize that, these are options that you can look at, and there are benefits. And of course, with every option, you have to look at the pros and the cons.
Yes.
And I think when you look at things like cryptocurrency, we can't ignore cryptocurrency. Cryptocurrency is here to stay, I believe. And there are many young people and businesses actually quite reliant on what happens, in the crypto market. But we do have to educate and let people begin to understand how they can utilize these digital assets. So for me, they have a big role to play when you think about digital currencies, for example, and innovations around digital currency. So even you look at CBDCs and wholesale CBDC, what we call wholesale CBDC. So, this is kind of cross-border, interactions or, cross-border payments, and how you can improve cross-border payments or remittance market, even utilizing CBDCs, I think is very exciting because it opens up opportunity to interact. Same with cryptocurrency, where you have situations, even the situation that's going on at the moment, when you start to think about conflict, right? And you have conflict between nations and things, and you cannot get access to fiat currency, for example.
Yes.
Right? It's difficult to get access to fiat currency. What happens then? Can we have alternatives that we can look at? But can we make those alternatives secure enough for people to interact safely without, so we need better consumer protection is basically what I'm saying. And better understanding of how do we regulate and manage these assets without killing off their benefits, because it's important. I think with cryptocurrency, especially for Africa, right, many Africans are now starting to look and say, oh, what's the option? Oh, I've heard about this crypto thing. I've heard about Bitcoin. Oh, and they talk to one another. Word of mouth is very powerful.
Yes.
You go and you hear, say, oh, you can get your loan from X. Don't worry about going to a bank anymore. You can get your crypto, and your crypto can help you do ABCD, right? So we can't ignore that. I think between 2020 and 2021 alone, we had something like 105 billion worth of cryptocurrencies flowing into the African continent, right? So that is not something to ignore. I think that is something that we have to start to look at and understand a bit better. If there are challenges, which there are also challenges even within the fiat monetary system, we also need to look at, okay, what are the challenges in the crypto industry? What do we need to do about it? So for me, they are part of the answer, and can actually help to mitigate against some of the payments struggles, some of the gaps, around kind of remittances, the costs that are associated with me just sending money home, to my relatives in Zambia. Traditional methods, cost me so much more money that I am going to look at alternatives, because I want to save money, even for me. And I want to make sure that money that I'm sending home gets there quickly, on time, right? To my mother or my sister or whoever that I'm sending the money to. So the whole issue around payments, around remittances, around, cross-border is very, very important. And now we have new ways of us being able to say, okay, become creative around monetary systems. So whether we're creating a new token, what is that token being backed by? How is that token regulated or governed is very, very important. So we have to look at things like the whole tokenomics, what we call tokenomics, and what does that actually mean, right? How can we start to look at that? And so the education bit is very, very important. But I do think they will play a bigger role than people think. And by the way, we're still kind of early days within the whole sort of crypto digital asset marketplace. So you're going to see a lot more other new forms of digital money, right, if you like,
Yes.
that we have not even heard about yet. So let's not go and try and kill things off without fully understanding them right now.
Yeah. So, I mean, you've kind of expressed in terms of they do have a big role to play, especially in aspects more personal in terms of sending money home, payments and remittance. So, do you believe that the way blockchain and blockchain solutions are being developed and deployed in Africa is different to the rest of the world? What types of innovations are we seeing that are specific to Africa?
Yeah. Again, looking at blockchain specifically, I think we're starting to see a lot more solutions on the continent, using blockchain. Most, that I've heard about have gone into things like looking at land titles, for example, on the blockchain. You're looking at data collection and storage, kind of using a combination, probably AI and blockchain sometimes. One area where I really think that the blockchain can play a very big, big role on the African continent is around healthcare. Healthcare.
Yes, I agree.
And pharmaceutical, right? I mean, COVID really kind of taught us that, look, your systems are kind of weak, right? In Africa, we cannot produce our own vaccines, for example. I know now, organizations like the IFC and others have come together to sign agreements to go and produce vaccines on the continent. Again, our medications, pharmaceutical goods, we get a lot of medication and sometimes fake medication,
yes,
right, which are going to people, right? And if we can start to utilize things like blockchain, I think we can start to kill off some of those challenges that I'm talking about. When we look at kind of track and tracing provenance, supply chain issues that we faced, blockchain can have a bigger part to play around that. But even with governments, right? Even with governments, when you're starting to look at things like revenue collection, tax revenue collection, procurement processes, you can start to utilize these technologies, right? It's really very much understanding, okay, where can we actually apply blockchain? Does it make sense for us to actually apply blockchain or not? Is it going to cost us more by doing this, by introducing blockchain? Yeah. So then do we really need it, or can we just, utilize what we have? Is it an existing database that we can use? What's the difference? Are we looking for stuff in real time? Are we dealing with a lot of documentation? Are we doing with many, many parties in the system? Then yes, probably blockchain might make sense, right? So it's very much being very clever about how you look and say, okay, where do we bring in blockchain? Because often we hear blockchain is spread across, around the world as, oh yeah, you can do A, B, C, D, and it sounds like we can do everything with blockchain, not necessarily,
I agree.
Not necessarily, but it is a very powerful technology. And the technology for me that I feel that even when you combine it with other technology, you're actually going to get a lot more value out of it. So it's understanding about the convergence as well. How do we converge different type of technologies so that we can get value out of it? And then again, another area which I am very passionate about, I think even in education, blockchain can play a big part. So for example, monitoring and looking at education certification, tracking and monitoring performance, even kind of earn and learn kind of models. We are looking at earn and learn type model, reward type system when we're educating, which is going to be powered by blockchain. and other technologies. So all that, I think, can play a big part, So it's not just so much, blockchain isn't so much just about Bitcoin, like most people think. It's not just about looking, how much Bitcoin has gone up and down. It's very much understanding, what about the underlying technology? What else can it do, right? Where else can we apply it? And if we apply it, what benefits are we going to get, or what disadvantages are we going to get? Because let's not forget, there are also disadvantages which we need to be aware about. But when it comes to Africa, for me, the whole thing around trade, around supply chain, around healthcare, and the shift that we need to make moving forward, I think blockchain can play a pivotal role.
I agree 100%. You beautifully touched upon the convergence and the value added in blockchain solutions in healthcare, education, government processes in Africa. What we're seeing in Africa at the moment is a lot of great innovations that are attracting international attention from investors. From a policy perspective, are policies in Africa providing an enabling environment for African innovations to be invested in, do you believe?
Yeah, I think they are, partly, but I think more can be done. For example, if we are to attract foreign investment, I think it's important that the right environments are there for these foreign investors to take part. But one thing I really want to emphasize is actually, for me, I would probably prioritize actually growing the internal investment market.
Yes.
More so than the foreign market, right? And the reason I'm saying that is because it's more sustainable. Again, at Global Policy House, I think we're the only Black female-led ESG sustainable business that looks at blockchain and investment.
Oh, wow.
And we're very passionate about sustainability as a whole, right? So if you want things to be sustainable, I think we have to think about different ways of doing it. So love to have lots of the, foreign investors coming in. And we've seen that, there's a big surge now, especially in fintech investment across the continent from, foreign investors. But we need to build up the local capital markets. We need to build up the local investment market, because that is going to sustain a lot of the programs that are set up in Africa. So for me, it's important that as governments, as policy frameworks and all that, really bear in mind that how can we create that environment to spur and excite internal investors, right? And make sure these internal investors are able to provide that investment that is needed, because that enabling environment is there. We are, of course, starting to see a lot more locally driven African investors, which is very, very exciting. Next week, I will be in Cape Town, and I'm meeting a couple of these investors, because I'm really wanting to say to them, look, can you invest more in the continent? Can you grow what you're doing and even, train and teach other upcoming, for example, VCs locally in Nigeria, in Kenya, South Africa, in Zambia, in Lesotho, and not necessarily just the big nations. I'm not saying let's all just carry on saying, okay, we're only going to invest in Nigeria, South Africa, Kenya, because that's where everybody's doing it. We need to diversify, and we need to look at other countries, because those other countries also have many projects and pipeline, that is very attractive, that you might not heard about, but because we're not going to those markets, so we're not advertising the pipeline. It's difficult for some of these businesses to get access. So for me, growing the internal investment market is very important. Yes, attracting the foreign investors is also equally is important, but I think the internal market is more important. So internal VC and investor market is needed to be grown in Africa. And I think some of the protocols that we're looking at, for example, the African Union is really looking to help with that. So, you look at the investment protocols and others that we're looking at, it's important that we create that environment for investors to feel like, okay, this is a good place for me to place my money, right? And this also goes to at national level as well. So I'd urge, national governments and investment agencies to really build programs and initiatives that actually encourage local investors, to invest in the continent and to grow what they have going on there.
Fantastic. So you touched upon the sustainability in investments, growing the pool of local investors, diversifying investments. That's something that definitely resonates with me, because every day you see these grand figures about African startups raising, I think it was £5 billion of investment in 2021. Have we peaked, or is there still room for growth, for more investment?
I think we definitely haven't peaked yet. I know the numbers sound very, very exciting when we hear about the numbers, but for me, again, I go back to the segmentation. So you have 5 or 6 countries
Yes.
where you hear these numbers are coming from, right? And these are big markets, don't get me wrong, but we have 55 countries in Africa. So for me, I think we haven't even scratched the surface, right? So for me, I think it's really important that we diversify markets, number one.
Yeah.
We diversify the investor pool, like I was saying. We grow the internal capital markets. We grow the local investment pool in order to actually grow the investment that is available, right, for startups. And then we look to diversify. So for me, definitely, I think we haven't even scratched the surface. I think we're going to see a lot more growth, definitely on the continent. The more and more people start becoming familiar with Africa, especially externally. I know that, for example, the Japanese market is starting to really be interested in Africa and are going in quite heavily into doing investments in startups in Africa. And it's great to see that. But at the same time as well, I would love to hear more about African VCs and African investors, and I know some are coming up. There's quite a few associations now, which is really wonderful to see, and also the other thing that I think for me would be really interesting is looking at the investment a bit deeply to say, okay, where is the money actually going to? Is this going to African founders, for example, who are on the continent, or is it African founders who are outside of the continent?
I agree.
Because again, that also has an impact, right? And we need to equal the level playing field there a little bit. The other one, of course, again, I think everybody knows this, most of the women-led businesses also still struggling quite heavily in terms of access and capital. So what are we doing about that? What are we doing about the early stage, to make sure that we are actually providing capital, at these different stages? Because there are different stages of growth for a company. Where is the investment going? Is it just going for businesses that are already starting to scale? Or, what happens to the ones that are just starting off, right? And the ones that maybe are scaling now need growth capital. We really have to kind of dig a bit deeper and to see where the gaps are so that we can start to fill them.
Yeah, I think that's a very valid point, because this sounds all very exciting, but sometimes we're very guilty of getting carried away and forgetting that not everyone has access to these solutions. So I was wondering, from more of a ground level, what can be done or is being done to ensure that, say, the marginalized in society are not being left behind by this rapid digital development?
Yeah, no, that's a really fantastic question. And I think it's really quite relevant for us because I think, like I said in the beginning, Global Policy House is very much about closing that digital and finance divide, especially for people who are underrepresented groups, number one, to, of course, marginalized, society. So for us, it's a couple of things, especially contextualizing it also to the African context. I think, in Africa, we have a big informal market, right? Many people in the informal market who might not necessarily have access to any of this stuff that we've talked about, right? Be it mobile phones, even internet or connectivity, right? They might not have that access at all. So how do we ensure they're also taking part? And for me, one of the things is really starting to look at digital infrastructure as a whole. How can we improve digital infrastructure in all these countries? How can we access to data? And the internet economy, which apparently we've got something like 180 billion worth of untapped internet economy on the continent, right? So how can we make sure that people can be geared to go and get some value out of that internet economy? They need to be able to participate, number one, right? So we need to provide access. And then, of course, we need to channel our investments, into looking at things like, skills development, digital skills development, education, training. And that's for us, we're looking at doing that quite heavy and scaling what we have been doing so far by working in partnership with some big institutions. So for us, we have a big drive, to ensure that we can provide digital skills, blockchain skills, a whole range of different training initiatives to support people. And we know that, okay, as a smaller organization, we're not going to be able to do that alone. So we have, started to partner with big institutions, including people like the UN, the Commonwealth, who do have access to that huge network, and we can be able to work with them to support. But again, back on the question around how can we ensure that we're not leaving people behind, and with these digital developments, I think we also have to make it a bit more tailored. So, you know, when we're in Africa, or if I'm in Zambia, for example, and I should be able to connect with the local networks, and in the informal sector, provide tools, you know, be it whether they're built on blockchain or not, or they're built on AI, really kind of doesn't matter so much. What we want is to provide actual tools to help these businesses, for example, you know, to do their business better. So farming, you know, I think 60% of farming, you know, is the main GDP generator for most African countries. So how are we helping the farmers, you know, to use these tools, right, to help them with planting things better, you know, in the right climate, the right time, so that they can harvest in time, they can sell their goods on a marketplace where they're getting value and the right pricing and they're competitive. That's what technology does. It helps with that. But at the end of the day, if you do not skill up people and you do not give them an insight on how to use these digital tools, then it becomes a bit difficult. So there are numerous steps I think we need to follow to make sure we don't leave people behind. There's training, there's education, there's giving them the tools, there's providing the tools in a language they understand. So, you know, we can all kind of produce tools and everything is in English, but, you know, maybe the farmers might not be able to use it. What about the visuals that are on that device, on that application that you've developed or built? What language is it in? You know, how is it going to get to people? Do they have smartphones or not? Can they use SMS, you know, for example, right? So it's very important, I think, that we start to look at things a little bit more tailored. At local context is quite important. And for me, I want to see a lot more participation, equal participation, you know, be it from men, young people. We're still not quite there yet. And I think we're slowly moving up to participate. And if we want people to participate in what I call the platform economy, which is the economy that we're heading in and that we're in, you know, most people are interacting through platforms now. You know, how many of our African people are able to get access to those platforms, right? And how are we creating access to those platforms? And when they do get onto those platforms, you know, how skilled are they to utilize them so that they can get value out of it? It's not just, oh, I want to just be on Instagram or Facebook.
Okay.
No, you know, I'm talking about, I want to create African Instagram or Facebook.
Yes.
You know, I want to create the next SMS chat, right? I want to create the next Google, right? This is what I'm talking about. It's not I'm going to go on the existing platforms. I want to know how to create these platforms for myself, or, you know, marketplaces that I can create for my community or whatever it is what we want to encourage. So Made in Africa, you know, brand, and strengthening that Made in Africa brand is really important.
Fantastic. So you've talked about underrepresented groups and the different initiatives to support people via training and education. From a more personal point of view, as an African woman who works in blockchain technology, which, let's be honest, it's probably extremely male dominated, can you tell us a bit about the work that you're doing to encourage more women, especially African women, to consider a career in this industry?
Yes, 100%. No, this is definitely very, very personal to me. Because, I mean, I have spent quite a bit of time. I think one of the few people who started quite early on in this industry.
Yes.
You know, I don't know. I kind of joke a bit sometimes to my friends. I say I tend to kind of end up in these sectors where there's like very few women, number one, and then very few women, you know, like African women, number two. And it's always kind of been like that in my career. So it's interesting in a way, but at the same time, it's also opens up my eye to say, no, but we can't have it like this. So for me, you know, one of the reasons that I also created Global Policy House was actually to kill that off, right? And to start to showcase to the world that actually, you know, whether you're a young woman or you're a Black woman or you're whatever, it really kind of that. I want you to not think about that. I want you to be able to be inspired to say, even I can do A, B, C, D, right? And if it's not there for you elsewhere, why don't you create it? Right. So for me, that was kind of the ambition with Global Policy House, was pushing me, was actually, okay, you know, some of these places I'm not invited to, some of these places I'm not going to get there. And you know what, it actually, I don't really care anymore, right? Because I had the struggles in the past.
Yes.
And I decided, no, but I can create this. What is stopping me from creating my own business, right? Yes, I know it might be a struggle, right, over time. But I wanted to create, to show to other young people, especially young Black girls, to start to think, actually, you know, you can do whatever you want, really, if you put your mind to it. You know, and it will be hard. It's not going to be easy, of course. But, you know, at the end of the day, if you're focused, you're determined, you can do what you want. So for me, this is quite personal. And I do believe, one of my ambitions, one of the company's ambition right now is actually to train and educate 10 million women by around, in the next couple of years, 2032 and beyond. Is really to provide digital skills, education, training, but also to build, as we're doing that training and education, is also to build products and services tailored for this target market, using blockchain, AI, and other technologies, really to empower women to make sure that they can go off and also develop their own things. So we're very, very passionate about that. And that is one of the biggest initiatives that we have in place at the moment. And we're interacting with big groups on this. And then we've also, launching our Collab for Impact initiative, which is very much focused on this, building the next generation of young women in blockchain, and not just young women, but we're talking about women and youth here for us. We're very passionate about that, ensuring that we get them the right skills, and we have digital training. We've got experiences. Ourselves at Global Policy House, we have trained, I think, over about 32 interns now. Around things like blockchain. Yeah, in the last 2 years, right? It's not very long. So for the last 2 years or so, we've had about 32 interns working in out of what we're doing at Global Policy House. And we have more joining again this year, and for me, that's really rewarding and enriching, because you see people coming in who had completely no knowledge of blockchain at all. Most actually come in and think, oh yeah, we're just going to talk about Bitcoin. And you see them walking out, right, at the end of the internship or whatever it is, and some are going off and starting off their own businesses. Very rewarding, for me, because I think ultimately we want to build the next generation of digital leaders. But in order for us to do that, again, we also need additional support, of course, to grow and scale what we have started. So that's really ambition, is working with different groups to grow and scale what we're doing. The other thing that we're doing is also, kind of doing a lot more research and development, like I said. So, really starting to collect data to start to understand these different markets, right? Most of the data sets and things like that are out there are not necessarily data sets that we have in Africa that we as Africans own. We need to create our own data sets. We need to create our own, for example, data centers and things like that. So we're also involved around the data side of things and looking at how we manage that side of things.
Fantastic. So you've talked about training the next generation of African digital leaders. So as a mentor or someone who trains the future leaders in this space, what advice would you give to people in Africa? Not even specifically young people, but just people who are interested in exploring blockchain and, say, digital currency as a career and business option.
100%. No, I think for me, my first message is do not see barriers, because sometimes we create barriers ourselves. And I don't want you to see barriers thinking, oh, no, this industry is just for X, or this industry is just for, absolutely not. The decentralized world as a whole, is built on the ethos of decentralization. So pretty much means anyone can participate, right? It's important that everybody can participate, everybody can get something out of it. So for me, I want people to understand that actually there is no barriers. And if they are, or you begin to see barriers, you can get over those barriers. I think you have to be understand that the world is shifting, the world is changing. The digital economy is kind of the next phase. The fourth industrial revolution is definitely here, and it's going to be driven by tech. It is being driven by tech. So it's important to participate in this world, this new world, because I think it will set you up for what is coming in the future as well. So if you can start to align yourself in this industry, you're going to get so much more out of it, not even just now, not in the short term, but in the long term, you're going to benefit so much from it. So I would encourage, especially women, especially young people in Africa, you have the chance to actually go off and set a new record. For me, I mean, what's more exciting than that, right? You've got a chance to go and, you've got a chance to go off and create new opportunities that people probably would never have thought about. And we're starting to see this on the continent. Be it you're starting to see, kind of new payments companies and new this and that, new unicorns here, left, right, and center. But we need to diversify that. So it's not just about fintech, it's about, okay, what's the next agriculture hotspot or unicorn? What's the next And agriculture is super sexy, by the way, everybody.
I had this conversation the other day.
Definitely. Because most people think, oh, no, I'm just going to say I'm in tech and it sounds really cool and awesome, right? But what we want, what we need on the ground, like dealing the problems that we have in our continent, be it issues around food security or be it issues around ABCD, we need to look at those issues as well. And they're equally important and equally sexy. Yes, tech comes in almost in everything, but it's important that we contextualize to what actually matters. For us, sustainability, as I said earlier on, is so, so important. Having impact on the continent is very, very important. So I say to everybody, please do not see barriers, see opportunity, right? Look for opportunity. And if you're not invited to certain things, which we all know, many of us tend to not to be, for me, I use that as something to really motivate me. For me, that motivates me, right? If you don't invite me to the table, don't be surprised if I come up with something, right? And then don't criticize me when I come up with something, because I am trying to create. I'm a builder, I'm a creator, I'm an innovator, and I'm not going to stop because I feel that, there's certain problems and situations that is up to us, ourselves, to actually solve. So again, my message to women as well, especially women, young women in Africa, is that, you have every opportunity. Don't see barriers. There are many avenues for you to get training or to get access to finance. I know there are many barriers there, but I think there are many organizations, including ours, who are now working towards to limit those barriers and provide you with a more easier route to get to do what you're doing. Education is important, right? I want to emphasize that because, again, I want people to not jump into things because they've heard their friends are doing it, or I'm going into be a Bitcoin, but I really have no clue what I'm doing. You can also self-educate. You can learn first, before you jump into things. Educate yourself. And there are many, many avenues now to be educated. So please get the education that you need. Reach out to us as well. We're always here to help. We're training, like I said, next digital leaders, and that involves a whole cohort of women. We want to see, as blockchain pioneers, blockchain leaders coming into the market. Digital currency side, of course, this leans more towards, kind of central banks and governments. I think, again, I would love the African central banks around the world, to work with us to look at, okay, how do we actually evaluate CBDCs in the context of Africa? How does that fit in with the ambitions around single currency, for example? How can we strengthen our own currencies, right? And not look further down the line in 10 years' time where we are dependent on a different currency. It might not be the dollar, by the way. It could be anything. It could be the digital yuan. It could be whatever. How do we navigate that space, right? How do we plan ahead? Planning, strategic planning, long-term planning. How do we look at long-term investment and financing to support our ambitions? For us, it's very important that we also look at that.
Fantastic. You heard it here first. Number 1, don't see barriers. Number 2, if you're not invited to the table, fold out your own table.
Yep.
And number 3, agriculture is sexy.
Love it, yes.
So, looking at it from a very different perspective, I know you work closely with several African governments. What advice do you give to governments regarding the benefits of these emergent technologies, blockchain, cryptocurrency?
Yes, no, this is really timely because, again, next week I'm heading to Kenya and South Africa, and we're talking about just this very question. So really interesting you asked that. I think for me, so I will be giving like a full kind of speech around this. And one of the things that, why is it so important? I think for governments, especially in Africa, I think we are transitioning, right? So we've had COVID, we've had many challenges, right, as countries, and we're going to look to rebuild. So how do we rebuild better? Yes. And I think technologies are going to play such a big role, especially when you think about data, right, and the importance of data for our continent. I hinted on it earlier on by saying, look, we need to be able to have our own data sets, but there's no point of having data that's not useful. 100%. There's no point of us collecting information that's not going to give us anything. So analytics is important. When you're looking at things like artificial intelligence and helping us to read and manage data sets is very important. So I'm just giving examples how these technologies can be used in a meaningful way, right? And not just in the noise that you hear in the media. There's ways that you can leverage these technologies to make it work for you. When you're talking about security and defense, again, technology comes into part, and I know that will be a concern of many governments. So how do we leverage these technologies for better security and defense? How do we leverage technologies for better trading opportunities, right? Better transparency, better, easy, seamless supply chains, How do we leverage them to do cross-border business with other jurisdictions around the world? How do we use technology to protect ourselves? I think all this, is the advantages and of opportunities that these emerging technologies can present. Of course, you would have to look at these technologies in the context at national level, right? To say, okay, in Kenya, what is our issues? What tech can we bring into play? And I know that's already happening anyway, in places like Kenya, which of course is an innovator in itself. Rwanda, again, innovator, even in Zambia and other places that most people, internationally might not have heard about. There's a lot that is happening in Africa. And sometimes you can't see what is happening because you're sitting, tied in your own country and you don't necessarily move about. For someone like myself, because I do move about a lot around the world. And I have seen a lot of things, right, in different parts of the world, be it Southeast Asia, be it Australia, be it here in the UK or in Africa. And I think there has to be better collaboration, especially when it comes to technology. We can really learn a lot from one another. So people in the UK can learn a lot from people in Kenya. People in the US can learn a lot from people from other parts of the world. So it's very important, I think, we start to look at it, research and development is sharing more. And that comes to my whole argument around data sharing. What data can we share? What data can we not share? How can we protect data? How can we ensure that we're leveraging data so that we make informed decisions? Without data necessarily, when we had COVID, it would have been very difficult to make decisions about, okay, what do we do next? We've got another outbreak in this area. We relied on the data,
yes,
right? And you've got these technologies to help you to read those data and to help you to make some really good informed decisions, and then also make some really great products. So customers are no longer that patient anymore. Most customers and consumers around the world, their behaviors are changing. So as governments as well, you need to understand that people's behaviors are changing. And you need to be able to align yourself, to be able to support those changes. So most people also want to know, okay, you as a government, you hold data on me. What are you doing with my data? What data do you have? Most people want to make decisions about how their data is being used and utilized. So all that, I think, tech really does play a very strong part. And then we also have to know the negative sides of tech as well. So we hear often about the positives, but there are also negative sides of tech. So if I can't, interact with tech, like I said earlier on, and I am in the country, in your African country as a government, what are you doing to support me to be able to have access? And for example, e-learning, right? Digital learning, when we had COVID, not every governments around the world could provide digital learning for people. Some were in the farm or some were in the village. They lost their education, right? What happens there? So as a government, we need to think of more creative ways of leveraging these technologies, and they have to be accessible.
Fantastic. So you touched upon collaboration, sharing data, the use of data, and leveraging technologies for a better Africa. So if we kind of keep that in mind in terms of the future, where do you see Africa in 5 years' time from a digital currency and, I guess, blockchain perspective?
Yeah, no, I actually see quite a lot of opportunity. I think you will see that from a digital currency perspective. I think you'll definitely see in the next 5 years more, I would say, central banks around Africa exploring CBDC, for example, central bank digital currencies, and starting to pilot, maybe one or two, a couple, starting to pilot actual solutions around this. You would definitely see a lot more countries, and we're already seeing this as a pattern where some countries are starting to develop their own blockchain strategies, long-term strategies I'm talking about, right? Starting to look at regulation around blockchain and cryptocurrency markets. I think you will see a lot more use cases, around blockchain and artificial intelligence on the continent. The more and more it becomes established. What I would like to see a lot more of, again, is more centers of excellence, if you like, that are run and driven by Africans really exploring the fourth industrial revolution. What I would like to see is more programs which we're already working on, that are geared towards training in these emerging technologies across the continent, including CBDCs and digital currency. And of course, in 5 years, 5 years feels like it's a long time. It's actually not that long.
No, it'll come around very quick.
And I want to see more kind of strategies and 20-year, 30-year strategies are being developed. I know, for example, the African Union is very much looking at things like e-commerce strategies, with which we have been involved in shaping and influencing. You're looking at the different protocols under the Continental Free Trade Area. So you're going to see an Africa that is progressing. An Africa that is coming up with some new solutions and ideas, but you also see an Africa that has to go through some challenges. And how we mitigate and manage those challenges is really up to us, and it's up to kind of leadership as well, having the right leadership in place to look the long term and set the vision. I spent a lot of time, I think the last 2 years in the Middle East, for example, and I've seen the vision there. Right. And the progress that the UAE has made in terms of very clear vision of what it is that we want to achieve. Same in Africa. I've seen countries in Africa where there's a very clear vision and people are working towards that vision and people are aligned towards the vision. Now, imagine if we can become better at collaboration. So Middle East and Africa teaming up. I know it's starting to happen. Imagine the ripple benefits that will come out of that, right? Where you have aligned visions in certain places, where you can encourage trade, you can open up trading corridors, you can open up exchange, education programs, or whatever it is, cross-country, cross-border. For me, that's the kind of the Africa I want to see, right? I want to see an Africa that is managing its own affairs and is deciding on its own growth trajectory, and that is what we're seeing, with things like the Continental Free Trade Area, of course, like I mentioned. So I think it will be a very exciting next 5 years. And then, of course, we have a young population across the continent, and this young population, believe you me, Tessa, is so fired up. Right.
They are.
They are so fired. Every time I go back and they're like, oh, Michelle, we've created this, we've built this, we've built that. And I'm like, wow. Now imagine if we're pouring in the right investments. Imagine if we're opening up doors for them to export their products and goods and services, right? You're going to see an Africa that will shock the world, I think. And for me, that would be very, very exciting.
You've painted a extremely positive, but also very pragmatic and realistic vision in terms of where you see Africa in 5 years' time, which is great. I think more importantly, where do you see yourself and Global Policy House in 5 years' time?
Wow, yeah, that is a good question. Yes, so I think personally myself, in the next 5 years, difficult one to answer because I have so many plans and so many ambitions. But I think in 5 years, I'll speak probably for Global Policy House first. I think for Global Policy House, I see GPH being a leader in not necessarily just central bank digital currency necessarily, but looking at a global leader when it comes to matters that are related to the digital economy, right? And I want to see Global Policy House be that go-to place where people feel, especially people from underrepresented groups, especially young women and women from around the world, where they see as, oh, this is a safe place for me to go to, where I can actually understand what this blockchain stuff is all about, what emerging technologies are all about. And then I want to also see Global Policy House as one of the main investment channels, right, where you can be able to source your financing, your investments, right, to get on with what you need to do. So especially, again, women, be able to say, actually, now I'm comfortable, I've got the right financing, I want to go off and do what I need to do. So I want to see Global Policy as, and I believe 100% that we will get there, that, to be one of the leaders, especially, a leading diaspora business, right, that's doing business in Africa and actually making changes in Africa in the areas that I talked about. Personally, for me, definitely, of course, I want to be able to lead Global Policy House with that long-term vision of making sure that we are closing that digital divide and ensuring that, there's a better equitable access to finance. And I also want to be able to work very, very closely with leading institutions around the world to actually shape policy. I'm still very passionate about policy because that's where I come from. They always say you have to remember where you come from.
Definitely.
And if you remember from when we first started talking, I started my journey in government policy and policy. And I also fell in love with blockchain. So I think I will still be very much in love with blockchain in 5 years' time. But at the same time, I want to be able to actually showcase to the world our actual own blockchain products that we would have built. And show to the world why it is so important and why for me, it was so key to jump into this journey. And of course, be one of the leading pioneering women that are doing important things for our continent. So for me, I'm very passionate about my continent, about Africa. And I want to make sure that I'm part of that growth story and making changes for my people. 100%.
Fantastic. And with the great work that you've done so far, I definitely believe that you will achieve all of that and even more in 5 years' time.
Thank you, Tessa. It's exciting.
No, definitely. And I'm excited to witness and be kept up to date with your progress.
Quote of the week.
This is a feature which I've kept as part of the podcast running in each episode. So as people, we often have quotes, mantras, even African proverbs that keep us going when times are hard. Do you have one that you can share with us today?
Yes. I mean, let me see. I think for me, it's really simple. I think together we win, apart we will fall. So I think it's very important that as a world, we come together, right? Especially in this time when there's quite a lot of challenge going on, there's conflict going on. I think if we start to kind of center back a bit and go back a bit and think about actually together is when we're actually going to prosper and do well. And if we are fighting and, are working apart, then as we've seen with COVID, we know where that leads to. So for me, it's very important that we learn to collaborate and start to look at things, with a bigger vision, right? It's not just about me. We have a saying as well, I am because we are. I think that's important.
Yeah, beautiful. I think that's very relevant considering the global situation currently that's happening and what came before with COVID and the pandemic. So thank you for that, Michelle. As we're coming to the close of our conversation, do you have any closing remarks and final calls to action for people out there who are interested in exploring cryptocurrency or the digital economy in Africa, blockchain? Any closing remarks, final calls to action?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Tessa. So, I think I want to, highlight to the world that, of course, our doors are always open. Global Policy House, please do reach us. You can, email me myself directly, michelle@thepolicyhouse.com. Very simple and straightforward. We are also encouraging more and more businesses and startups, especially women-led businesses, to reach us. We are also, making sure that we have like an Africa tour that we're doing as well this year. So watch out on our websites, on my LinkedIn as well. You find me, Michelle Chivunga, on LinkedIn. And I'll be, sharing a lot of the stuff that we'll be doing. Our summits that are coming up will cover things like central bank digital currency, sustainable impact investment, decentralized finance, DeFi, metaverse, which I'm sure some of you heard about, NFTs. Yes. We're going to be covering quite a lot of that in our physical gathering in Kenya in June, between the 15th to the 20th. And then again, we'll be in Rwanda from the 20th, because there we have the Commonwealth Heads of Government meetings that we hope to participate in. So we really encourage people to follow that as things are coming up. And then post those events, we'll be doing our Africa tour in different parts of Africa, Ghana, Nigeria, and a couple of others. So just do reach out if you're interested. For our training programs, as you've heard, we are looking to train, and support 10 million women, not just training, but also things like access to finance, access to mentoring, networking, 10 million women, and we are partnering with many, many organizations on that. So watch out for that and follow again, our pages to be reminded about this, but very, very excited and very, very excited about the future of Africa. I think we are in it together. As I said earlier on, Ubuntu, I am because we are. So let us just go and change the world together.
That's a beautiful way to close the conversation. We are in this together. It's all about collaboration, partnership. So thank you, Michelle. Thank you again. That has been an extremely refreshing, wholesome, and also at the same time, innovative conversation. One that I think I definitely needed today. I feel extremely positive after that conversation. I think what you've done is you've given me reassurance and insight into how people are using technology effectively for both commercial and social good in Africa, which is great to hear. So thank you, Michelle, for giving us your valuable time and sharing your story and your journey within the digital economy, blockchain within Africa. So yeah, thank you again.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you, Michelle, and we will speak soon. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you to everyone who has listened and stayed tuned to the podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share, or tell a friend about it. You can also rate, review us in Apple Podcasts or wherever you download your podcast. Thank you, and see you next week for the Unlocking Africa podcast.